So you've spent all this time telling the story of Guilty Gear, but Woolie, do you like the story of Guilty Gear?
What? You broke up there, huh?
The story behind the Guilty Gear series is as wild as any of the characters that inhabit its universe. With events that occur over hundreds of years, it can be a lot for newcomers to take in, especially before a new game like Guilty Gear Strive. Thankfully, Woolie teamed up with Arc System Works for his excellent Guilty Gear lore series and dived into the nitty-gritty of all things Guilty Gear. I sat down with Woolie to talk about the origins of the project, the challenges in putting it together, and his overall thoughts on the story of Guilty Gear. So how did this project all come about?
Straight up, ArcSys approached and asked if this was something I'd be interested in doing. We kind of got a little bit of a initial connection when I went out to Arc Revo 2019 and got to meet some of the folks there and experience Strive for the first time and say what's up and shake some hands and talk to some people. But we were in the middle of last year. I got in touch and said, hey, would you be interested in creating a summarized version of this story that people can digest? There's a couple different series on YouTube that are out there that make the lore easy to consume for, people that are fans of the series. So obviously there's like Dark Souls lore out there. There's Yoko Taro lore videos for things like Nier and so on that are really great from some great creators. And Guilty Gear has a very long and convoluted story. And yeah, they basically wanted to have something like that exist that people can refer to understand what's going on before starting Strive. And this was more or less them asking me if I was interested in taking the project on.
Now, were you working primarily with ArcSys US, or was this the Japanese branch?
ArcSys US. And JP was involved in that. They were approving scripts and they were approving all the work and reviewing everything we were doing. But my understanding of it was that this was a push from the American branch, yeah.
What's the workflow for something like this like?
The average flow was more or less, I would section off a chunk of the story and I'd say I'd cover from here to here, write a full script out, and then elaborate on, paragraphs of points that were worth going into and choose what selectively to include or not include. And then after lining all that up and sort of putting references and points in it, I would send it off. They would get it translated, and then the writers and the team would take a look at it. They would more or less confirm and fact check the details and some things like that. In some cases, there were things that were just a matter of English translations that were official, but not at all how the original Japanese was used and things like that. There'd be a couple of little moments like that. But for the most part, it was just, Japan approving everything that was written down, making sure that it all was coherent, made sense, and was correct, and would then send it back and, give the thumbs up on it.
How much of the story did you know before starting this?
I knew the general outline of each of the major arcs. I knew the major bullet points of a lot of the stuff from the past. When it got to Double X, I knew there was a lot of multiple endings and branches, but I hadn't seen all of them at that point. There was just, and of course, across the different games with Accent Core as well, that's a different set of endings from Double X. Yeah, I had seen some of those, but not all of them. With Exerd, I had not seen a whole lot of the prologues, but I did watch the Sign movie, and then I'd read about the events of Revelator at that point. So it was overall a mixture of half seeing it myself and half reading summaries and catching glimpses here and there of a Pachinko commercial or something like that. So yeah, I would say I was about half familiarized. And for the games that I didn't, or books and stories I didn't know anything about, I at least knew the overall gist of what occurred in it, in a summarized form.
How did you plan out the series? Was it always 7 episodes?
Poorly. No, I didn't always have it at 7. I initially had it at 5, and I think that I expected a lot of the density to come on the back end, and then I expected that like, Exerd would be heavy, but more or less contained, not realizing how much the prologues and epilogues add to that running time. Furthermore, the change in how the story is presented as it gets later and more modern is a huge factor in, like, if you're slicing this cake up, I made a mistake in thinking that, like, the overall, like, we're covering hundreds of years of timeline in like the first episode. So that's a lot of things, but you're really just kind of saying a sentence or two to summarize like an event that goes down. Whereas in Exerd, I'm going line by line in a conversation two characters are having. So while it starts as a timeline, it kind of ends as a moment to moment summary of films and, like a walkthrough of these prologue modes and things like that. So it initially was supposed to be 5, and I thought that, we would more or less just tack on like Vastedge here if need be, tack on the epilogues there. But around the time I got to the beginning of Sign and I did the Pachinko game plus the prologues of Sign, I realized, oh shit, there's so much left that has not been touched here, that like we've been getting 25-minute episodes out that are more or less fine. I stretched it to like a little past 30 or 40 once before that, but now we have to release essentially 2-hour-long chunks because I have about 3 hours worth of content here, and we can't just present that to people in one final video that's like the length of the entire series up to this point. That'd be insane. So I asked them if they were okay with me extending it by 1 episode, and if they're okay with those episodes being twice as long and twice as dense, essentially. There were a lot of people waiting to see this series through before starting the Strive story. So I wanted to make sure to get that out of the way as quickly as possible. And I wanted to, not leave anyone lingering. So yeah, those last 2 episodes had to be released at the same time because I felt like people were already waiting on the end. And if they got another to be continued while they were waiting to start Strive, it would have felt like crap. So that's why the double release at the end there. But yeah, initially it was supposed to be a bit shorter.
Each video has a pretty cool look. Did you kind of do all that, or did you have help?
Yeah, so that was how I wanted it to look. For the actual logo, I had that designed by Lee Mounsey Smith, a really great graphic designer who's helped me out. He's also responsible for the WoolieVersus logo. And one of my editors as well, Solidus, who helped a lot in the first episode, did a great job by getting that cog actual art there together. I had the idea of thinking, let's literally create a gear that will, move through time and keep track of all these events, because the first episode was a really big learning experience, because the first version of that episode was more or less like so I created like a Metal Gear Solid 3 timeline is the thing I kind of explained it as, where at the end of that game they just start you in like the 60s and then start going down the list of events, and I just read them off and put a little 1-sentence or 2-sentence summary under each date. And I realized, especially after like cutting out the dead air time, that this was so much information with nothing to really grab onto that it was an overflow, right? We went from 1221 AD all the way to the end of the first game, and you got the events like spit at you, but you couldn't really retain it. And I especially was thinking, if you're sitting here paying attention to this with your fullest like undivided attention, and it feels like that, if someone's watching this on a stream, if they're playing a game and distracted, if it's on their phone in the background and they're kind of just catching up to find out what's going on, you would retain nothing. So and this was when there was no actual like cutscenes to show you or any visuals to really go off of, except for like some booklet art, and a little bit of some sketches here and there. So I realized like real quickly in that early episode, I need to put giant dates, numbers, and words on screen constantly to keep reminding you, to keep you grounded in where you are, what we're talking about, and why. And as soon as the topic shifts to another thing, I have to say what that thing is, throw that date up there, make it constant, and like for any moment when you go, wait, what are we talking about? Oh, you have one reminder. You have a piece of art on screen, you have the date up there, and it'll keep you engaged and keep you like not getting lost in the flow of things, because it really was hard to retain all that information in that first test run of it. As we move forward in the story, it becomes less about these years and it becomes more about these events, these moments, literally down to the day and time, you know, of a given year, because the last half of this franchise takes place in 2187. The entire, like, all of Strive, all of Exerd, all of Revelator, all of Vastedge, these are all, and all of Overture as well, are all in the same year. So there's no point in that cog anymore. You hit a point where it's not going to serve a purpose. So let's have it included for a brief moment to show you if we switch a year, but then fade it out. In the middle of the series, it starts showing up for a moment and then fading out because it's not as necessary anymore. It's more about the subject matter. The time frame that we're discussing is like Sin and Soul are hanging out one day. It doesn't matter when now. It's just in between these two moments, and we title that section. Or we're getting into Chip's backstory in the book. We're just going to give you the title of that section, but we all know this is taking place within the same year, so it just made more sense.
I know for some of the earlier parts of the story that don't necessarily have a lot of media or cutscenes, you had to kind of like create reenactments. How did you pull that off?
Yeah, I mean, I literally grabbed like screenshots from moments that were like similar to things, but not exactly those moments. Characters talking where there's just nothing to show you. It was fun sometimes. It was really exhausting other times because it was just hard to figure out like how to make this art stretch for this moment. The Conclave being an example where every time we use the Conclave, we only have so many cutscenes from Sign and Revelator to rely on, so we had to use those cutscenes way ahead of time earlier, and like maybe four or five times in different contexts, you know. But it got pretty strict and pretty rough at some points. I made use of the figure editor in Sign and in Revelator. There's a little section where you can unlock toy gachapon versions of the characters in Guilty Gear Xrd, and you can put them on a background, rotate them, change their expressions, and I was like, perfect. I will literally create screenshots of moments that I need to when I need two characters facing each other. So Kai and Dizzy standing next together in casual clothes looking at fireworks to talk about their relationship. Great. We have the toys, we can put it together. I created that moment ahead of time. Or Chip and Answer meeting up and talking about their first steps towards creating the Eastern Chip Kingdom. All of that was using the little figure mode, you know, so I was able to cover some of the dead moments with that. The other thing was like just kind of relying on, in some places, like concept art. And I guess what I was trying to do is like imply a feeling with it. So there's a scene where that man is waking up in a lab that is like rejuvenating his health and his life and stuff, and there's no pictures anywhere of anything like that. So I'm just like, let me just give the vibe of that by using a foggy background over concept art and sketch art of that man, and then talk about the lab, and between that and the sound effects you'll get the impression of like this moment. It's kind of interesting because a bit of fog, a bit of sky and clouds moving over a game background it works really, really well. It carried the entire series. It was a major thing besides the two framing borders on the sides there. And yeah, I just made use of that quite a bit.
I think one of my favorite parts in this series is the reveal of the Pachinko machine and just how important it is to the overall Guilty Gear story. And the way you introduced it was pretty absurd in a way. Was that intentional?
So that's it, right? And I know that people have heard about this, and I could have just said Vastedge XT and then never said what it was and then just moved on. But I'm like, no. I want you to know that this is a Pachinko machine. If you've never heard of this, I want you to be aware of how obtuse this is, because it is this insane. And I think part of appreciating how crazy the story is also realizing where some of the source material comes from, you know? Like it's linked. You need to know like what, like how this was divided and why and how insane that was, you know. So the little live action segment, the commercial, he lifts up the blade and then you see the machine, you know. Yeah, so it turns out that there is really no footage of this anywhere that's clean and direct. There was the trailer, there was a promotional video, and then there was 2 TV shows that were like just pachinko ad shows that aired in Japan that had someone playing the game and getting excited and promoting the pachinko machine itself, not knowing anything that was going on it. So it was always them primarily in the frame, and really tiny in the background is this one little screen of the action happening. And on that is the only place where you're going to see the character Baldius that they're fighting, one of the Conclave members. It's the only place you're going to see him showing up, doing things like eating a Fafnir and dying, and there's no other existing footage I can use. So let's crop it, let's do what we can, let's work some magic to make it visible, even though it's a blurry mess, and like I'll just explain what happened there. But yeah, I had to rely on these 3 promotional videos. Now, I found out later on, not later on, I found out while I was making it, that also they ported this to a app that plays pachinko on your phone, but one, this had to be on a Japanese phone with the Japanese Apple App Store, and 2, this needed to be like 7 or 8 years ago. So it was you just literally couldn't. And I went as far as setting up a Japanese phone with a Japanese account and getting on the Japanese App Store and going to the old page to download it, but it was no longer available. So I was ready to go and I couldn't get to it. What I then had to do was go to the Pachinko website for the game that explains how it works from the 7 or 8 years ago, and then rip the background assets of that, and then use the background assets of the website to pepper in some of the more clear shots of the characters, even the borders that we used. Like the borders change for each game to be an asset from that game. And yeah, that's where I ripped directly from the website, you know. I made do with what I could. I did get some assets from Arxis for like, you know, Strive and for like Exert and things like that, but like for a lot of the older stuff, I was on my own.
Was Arxis even aware just how important that pachinko game was? Did they remember that they made a pachinko game?
I mean, like, they had to get some approval to show to make sure the footage was okay, but yeah, I think there were some blind spots. I know there were some real funny things that occurred. There was a particular moment where a major part of the story was something that I had sourced to a short story in an art book page of the not MOBA, but the MOBA-like game Overture. And it was pretty important. It was very significant. And it was something that, in the approval process, it was not recognized. They weren't too sure. And it was like, did you make this up? And I was like, I did not. Here it is. Here's the text of it. Here is it, translated, to make sure that the context is correct. I really didn't make anything up here. This is all sourced. And like, it was like, oh shit. Okay. No, thank you. And then there was a bit of a like, hey, you know, you might have caught, you caught a blind spot that, Guilty Gear themselves didn't notice there, you know? So anyway, there was a couple of moments where I think there's a lot on their tables as well, and sometimes they didn't notice when some papers got shuffled off the desk and behind and fell into a corner for many years, you know? So yeah.
I hope you're enjoying this interview with Woolie on the Guilty Gear lore series. We actually have an extended version of this video on our Patreon for $5 and up members. So if you want to hear even more about making this project, you can become a patron at patreon.com/holdbacktoblock. Back to the interview. What were the more difficult parts of the project?
In a lot of cases, so there's short stories, there's novels that are untranslated and, you know, needed to be like translated, and where you had to kind of grab some of these ideas, and it was difficult to deal with the parts that are like, this is a major part of the story, but it's just, here it is, all in Japanese, and you're looking at these pages or this artwork and trying to make sense of what all of this means, you know? Those were definitely, again, like some of the parts that were just like, oof, there's no assist coming in to help on this one. Also, there's the audio CDs, audio dramas that were used that, like, again, they're significant enough. The events that take place here do matter. Listening to some of those, I have a native speaking Japanese speaking friend who was able to help with some things as well, and kind of just be like, hey, can I double check your ears on this? What do you think of this part? The scarcity overall of some of this material was like, yeah, it was just like really, really hard to work with. There's, for example, there's a new novel that was released like barely, maybe 2 years ago or so, called Guilty Gear Begin, that, you know, kind of goes into some of the details about like what happened in the lab with Frederick back in the day and such like that. And I mean, that's one of those things where that's so new. It came out, it was released, it was official, but like you're doing your best to like look at some of these screenshots and get context from them. And you're like, okay, one of these pages is going to talk about who this is, but I don't know which page is going to be. And, you know, and again, to be like, hey, can you guys like, maybe like, no, they're not going to have the time to, you know, come in with the assist on that. So overall, the non-game material, you know, especially was like some of the roughest stuff to dig into. And I scoured, you know what I mean? Like I did my best, and that's why I took so much time with like, you know, that entire like background process, just the amount of sheerly untranslated materials. Another thing that comes to mind too is like stuff that is, I kind of got to discover part of like how they wrote the story is there were ideas that changed. They had one plan in mind for something, and then it kind of becomes another thing over time. So you're like, okay, how much emphasis do we put on the first version of the thing if it ends up being a completely different thing later on? The link between Axel and Eno was originally a link between Axel and Raven. You know, the term merciless apocalypse later on becomes universal will, but they're kind of going back and forth on like what to call that exactly. And just little things, you know, that was a little bit tricky to kind of choose what to commit to. And then I'd say towards the end, deciding what to cut was the hardest, because while we could just focus on Sol and Kai and do the main story with them the whole time, everyone that's watching this, I'm assuming, has a favorite, a main. They're a fan of one of these characters. And I saw in the comments, like, people are like, yo, when's Dizzy? Yo, when's Jam? You know, when's more of whoever I'm looking for? And if that person has a little moment and I cut it out and they get nothing, that would suck if you were looking forward to, you know, your character having a little thing in there. So making sure to include all the little moments, all the little interactions, so that you can see Johnny and Kum hugging each other and having a little heart-to-heart moment there, you know? Like, if you like those characters, it's cool for you to see that, and I want you to not miss that out while getting the story summarized. So just, yeah, the cutting room floor on some of this stuff was particularly challenging, you know, and there's even one or two things that I regret cutting that I would go back in and put in now if I could. One of the audio dramas has a story about Eno fucking with time and creating an alternate reality where Kai dies and everything goes haywire. And I kind of had to summarize it really quickly because of the amount of things, but in that alternate reality where things go wrong, like there's a moment where, like, you know, Sol is kind of heading towards fighting Dizzy as like the final confrontation. And I mentioned offhand that like Johnny's dead and like May's leading the Jellyfish Pirates. There's a pretty like sad moment where like it's pretty much like humanity's dead and like the Jellyfish Pirates are like some of the last fighting forces, and they're heading into like a suicide charge. And May has this like inspirational speech about how like it doesn't matter if we die because Johnny's waiting for us on the other side. And like it was this really like ooh kind of moment where I was like, you know, I probably should have included that. We didn't have time, so I just kind of offhandedly mentioned Johnny's dead, May took over anyway. But like that was a part where I'm like, yeah, that would have been a good little thing to establish that kind of like fucked up alternate reality a little bit, you know?
If you were to do something like this again, would you handle things differently?
I would definitely approach it differently. I learned as I went along, but like it would have helped to like really get all my like cards together even more than I already did in advance to like realize the density of how this was going to shape up. I would definitely change things about how I got it together now. I'd have to look at the game, see how much lore was in the game versus how much would have to be pulled out and explained, you know, from just text and or images without any real video to show. I'd be smarter about like how to handle that research time. I wasn't as efficient as I could have been, and I learned how to get better at it, certainly. I think I would take on a project like this again in the future, but I would just have to make sure that I had better time management. There were a couple weeks I had to cancel of my streams and videos in order to like get work on this done. And I had already planned for some of that time, but I flew way past what I expected on it, you know? So, overall, just, a better skeletal structure to the whole project from the get-go, so that I wouldn't be as surprised. And if I was, I would have accounted for some of that time, you know, better going in.
How do you feel about the reception that these videos are getting? Because they're pretty popular.
I'm really, like, again, super jazzed at how positive it's all been. I feel like it's been, like, just a crazy amount of every single day people going, like, this is literally why I'm picking up Strive. This is literally why I'm getting into this story mode. This is why I'm enjoying the game. People that are coming in for that world building and for that fun, and to join in on, like, enjoying this narrative and the rock, you know, the whole feel of it. Like, there's a lot of people that are just like, they've been admirers of Guilty Gear from a distance, but never really jumped in. And for some people, it's just like, yo, what are the mechanics? How do we do this RC? What can I option select? You know, people are going to be looking at it like that. But there's a whole lot of people that are just like, who are these characters and why should I care about them? You know? And then like people going like, oh my God, Ramlethal needs to be protected. Now I know where that puppy comes from. You know what I mean? Like, those people are like, they're interested in and invested in that character now. And they're like, now I like Ram. I know about this whole deal. So it's been really, really, really cool. And people have been so nice, you know, and awesome about everything. It's really nice to see that like people are like finally able to understand a story that they've been staring at from a distance but not quite sure how to interface with for the longest while, you know. And I'm happy to think that this might be something that, like, for years now, anyone who needs an answer to this, like, what is Guilty Gear about, can just point in this direction, you know. Ideally, I would like that to be the case. I'd like people to just be like, here you go. If you've got, like, if you're willing to spend about 4.5 hours getting the whole thing together, then this is a playlist you can watch to give you surface level detail of everything and actual in-depth detail of most things.
So you've spent all this time telling the story of Guilty Gear, but Woolie, do you like the story of Guilty Gear?
What? You broke up there, huh?
Because the story is kind of batshit insane.
It's batshit insane. It's batshit insane. I love it at its hypest. I embrace how goofy it can be at its goofiest parts. I honestly, like, I honestly, unironically enjoy how campy it can be at times, deliberately so. And, like, again, there's, like, the fact that there is important lore in a pachinko machine. A villain dies in a pachinko machine. That's unbelievable to me that that's a part of how this storyline plays out, which is why I'm like, let's talk about that. Let's include that, you know? I think it's legitimately a fun time as someone who can appreciate, like, batshit insane stories, as someone who can appreciate Kojima doing his Kojima-est in Kojima games, or if you look at any great, like, Suda game or sweary game, there's always just these crazy flavors of, like, what the fuck were they thinking with the, oh, okay, what? It's weird, but okay. And Daisuke is the same thing, you know? Like, his world is, like, it's one from his Trapper Keeper that he drew back in high school. I feel like a lot of this is just like the stories that he was thinking about as his project, his baby. I mean, that's why early on, he was involved in so much of the game and the art and the music and the voice acting and everything about it, and like as it grew, more people joined and other writers joined, and it kind of became a larger thing overall. But I embrace it with all its crazy shit and all of its hype shit.
So this opportunity is pretty incredible because you are, a Canadian YouTuber telling the story of a Japanese franchise directly for that publisher and developer. That's kind of significant, isn't it?
That is not lost on me. And, I think you're similar to me in that, like, we fucking love fighting games, man. So being able to contribute in any way to them and like some kind of official capacity, fuck yeah. Like, you just, these things are passions, dedicating your life to it. It's incredible. Knowing that, I also know that, like, they definitely are not going to put all their eggs in one unknown Canadian basket, because there's a comic book they released at the same time on the website. They've got little videos of May talking to you in the Robo May, and May explain the story on their little like 2-minute segments on the Japanese channel as well. They've uploaded all of the sign footage to YouTube. Like, they're not, they've put other things out there, and then there's the whole actual mode in the game too, which you can do. But the opportunity to do this has been incredible. I'm like, this is one of the coolest things I've worked on ever, for sure. I'm also proudest about it because of not only the official like recognition of it, but the part where I think this is going to actually have a lasting effect, hopefully, on the fan base that is getting into this series. I think I feel like the utility of this playlist going forward is going to be huge for anyone starting this franchise out. And that is super cool. I'm really, that's probably the coolest part, is just that, like, there's probably a back end kind of like legacy utility to this, and anyone who wants to tell anyone about how cool Guilty Gear is, like I said, you can point them to this, absolute dream to like be able to work on anything official fighting game related in this way, and super kudos to them for reaching out and making this happen. I mean, Zotbuster, the fucking what a great guy, super cool. I'm so happy that there's just a willingness to reach out to the fan base and to channels like mine and just be like, you like this thing, right? Do you understand it? And the ability to just be like, yeah, I do, and I can do this. And like, yeah, overall, they've been really happy. I've heard a lot of really great things from them about how it's been received. I think once the first episode kind of showed like, oh yeah, I'm going to present this in a pretty cool way. I'm not just going to grab some rounds of match footage and, talk over it and call it a day. Like, they were like, okay, feeling more confident about it. And yeah, overall them feeling happy about it makes me feel good. And I'm, again, down to work on other fighting games and other projects like this in the future. Like, it's an exciting thing that I don't often do, and I don't take a crack at video essays too often, as I started off saying in the beginning of this, but like it's fun, and I would definitely do more.
Many thanks to Woolie for taking the time to chat, and to my patrons for making this video possible. If you're looking to watch something else, why not check out our other feature on Woolie and his work getting others into fighting games. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, if you'd like to support my work directly, you can do so at patreon.com/holdbacktoblock. Until next time.